he was sort of like Marvin Hagler. I have to. One of my favorite guys of all time when I was in Boston was marvelous Marvin. Hey, don't use the word Marvin. I call him marvelous before.
So one of, I think, my favorite athletes outside of a hockey player, and your favorite athlete outside of a hockey player, was marvelous Marvin Hagler, who was a middleweight champ for.
He won, and the last fight he had. Remember the fight he had against Sugar Ray? What a jerk Sugar Ray was. I mean, he really was. I went to his training camp. The whole Bruins team went to his training camp. And we went to Carmen Basilio. He was a great guy, Carmen Basilio, Canastota, come from Canastota, New York, the onion farmer. Anyhow, he was a great guy, and he talked. He stopped and talked. This guy wouldn't even look at us, Sugar Ray. So anyhow, he won that last fight. No, and that was the last fight.
That was the last fight. He lost a controversial decision to Sugar Ray, and then he quit boxing and he moved to Italy, and he became a big movie star.
Yeah, and he really looked good. He really had a Fu Manchu.
Yeah, people don't like. He was a big star in Boston, and everybody knew him.
Everybody knew him,
and he terrified the middleweight division in boxing.
Well, he couldn't get a shot.
He couldn't get a fight, and finally, Ted Kennedy, who was, I don't know if he's a senator or congressman, said, if Marvin Hagler doesn't get a shot, he says, I'm investigating boxing.
Well, he should have too.
And so he got a shot, and then he always had a kind of a chip on his shoulder because he destroy everybody, and he couldn't get a title shot because nobody'd fight him because he was a southpaw.
He's southpaw too.
So then he fought Alan Minter in London, was an Englishman, and he just I think it went 3 rounds. And so, he wanted to get the belt and raise the belt, and the British people started throwing bottles of beer at him. They had to rush him out of the ring. And then everybody who's a boxing fan remembers the maybe 2.5 greatest rounds of boxing of all time was him and Tommy Hearns.
Hitman, boy, that was at 3 rounds. And you talked to an old fighter, eh? Boy, that was the best 3 rounds. I remember watching one guy go, that guy, it was unbelievable. Hitman, they call him the Hit. He was a big, tall guy, eh?
Yeah, and it was like, I think to me, it's really the last time that 2 guys like them that were in their prime. Yeah. They're both in their prime. Like every now with boxing, you see guys, one guy's kind of not in his prime, and the other guy's just coming up. These guys were the 2 best boxers.
And were they good?
Fighter. And Tommy Hearns was they thought he was going to box.
Hitman, they call him.
Hitman.
I thought he was a heavyweight.
No.
No, he's middleweight.
He was big enough to be a heavyweight.
Yeah, yes, I
was
thought
about
he was
6'2".
So everybody thought he was going to box, and they just went out and they just put their heads down and started throwing him. And then I was watching an old interview with Mike Tyson, and they asked him about Marvin Hagler, and he said he was one of the greatest, if not the greatest middleweight of all time. And he says, well, didn't you think Tommy Hearns should have boxed him? And he says, no. He says, Tommy Hearns couldn't keep Hagler off him for 12 rounds.
Yeah, that's why
he says, that's why he did it. And that's the first time I heard a boxer.
Amifermo, remember that, Mary?
So we have a couple of stories about with us.
Well, Marvelous used to come in the Bruin, my office all the time, shake hands, and you'd only shake very soft. They didn't want you to hurt his hand. The jerks that grab him.
Guy wants to prove
I don't mind a firm handshake, but you get every once in a while you get.
Some guy did that to you at the airport.
Remember the airport, the incident where you?
Yeah, I just come to. I was carrying my bag. I remember it was in Ottawa, and I was carrying, and I don't know, we were coming from one place, and I had my suit bag, and I had the other bag, so I put and they shook hands. He was a security guy. He was an ex-Mountie, and he crushed my hand. I said, "Whoa, wait a minute." I dropped, and Ron looked back.
Because you left, and then you went back and found him.
I said, wait a minute, let's just do this right. Because I was tired. And I didn't think he'd crush my hand. He crushed my hand. You hear the bones cracking. All right, let's do this right. Anyhow, he did not. He was. I remember he was a cruel guy.
Yeah, tell us about the time, the whole story. We went to see him fight a guy, an Irishman in Boston, Jim Finnegan.
Oh, Jim Finnegan. He was everybody that fought in Boston had an Irish name. Remember the time you and I went And now, if you have Irishmen fighting, they don't fool around. They go out and they throw bombs, and that's what people like to see. So anyhow, we go to the fight. Tim and I go to the fight.
We were at the Boston Gardens, and you know that was the Boston Gardens was originally the original Boston Gardens was built for boxing
because it was so slanted.
Slanted because everywhere you sat, you were right on top of the ring.
Yeah,
it had a good
That's
angle.
why people love the Gardens. If you're a fan, I mean, used to be a few pillars, but anyhow, so we're sitting there, and this guy comes out. He was really heavy, really fat. He's a fat guy. And they just threw bombs, and the people just went wild. So the next fight, the two guys that could really fight, pitter pat, they were really good defensive guys. And so it was silence. And about the fifth round, some guy hollered, "Bring back the fat guy!" And everybody just roared. Remember that? I remember one time he was fighting. Did I finish the story about Finnegan?
No, tell us about you.
Okay,
because you guys are playing in the afternoon, and then Marvin was fighting in the at night.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you. First of all, I'll tell you what Finnegan. So I noticed the first round he was really good. He was fantastic. And this guy would be going almost knocked out. He'd pick him. He'd let him go, clear his head. Then the next round he'd almost knock him out, and he'd hold him. He went, and I saw him after. I said, "Marvelous." I said, "I don't want to say anything, but I said, you could have knocked him out in the first round. Why didn't you knock him?" And he cut him for 52 stitches. I said, "Why didn't you knock him out in the first round?" He said, "I like to see him suffer." And how about Amafermo?
Well, remember the time though you went to see that fight?
Oh,
yeah. You stayed. You played in the afternoon, and then you thought, I don't want to drive home, so I'm just going to have a nap in the dressing room. And
No, I didn't have a nap. I watched our game. So I'm sitting there. So we played in the afternoon. The Bull Gang was really good. They could switch it over.
They always got their money's worth out of the Gardens.
Oh,
Either
boy.
the Celtics and the Bruins used to sometimes play the same day.
So they had to fight that night. So I thought, well, if I drive all the way back to North Andover where I lived, it was about an hour, eh? Well,
Yeah.
I'll go.
Good
about
hour.
an hour, eh?
yeah, at least.
Yeah, so I'd just get home and I'd have to turn around and come back. So all the reporters left and everybody left and all the hockey fans left and everything. So I sat in the room, had a few beers, and I had one beer. Well, I'll have another beer. And so I'm feeling pretty good. So I walk out and I had remember that blue leather coat I had on? Remember that?
The long one.
Oh, that was beauty.
It looks like almost the one Reggie Dunlop was
Yeah,
wearing
they call me
in
Reggie.
Slapshot.
The players call me Reggie for what the hell they call me Reggie
Yeah,
for?
you did look like Reggie.
Yeah, I hadn't seen the movie. So it was long. So I come out. I said, well, I'll take 2 beers out, 2 in each hand. And you could go in the Boston Gardens, but you couldn't bring the cans. You could bring
They were in a cup.
Yeah, in a cup. So I remember walking out, and I never, ever sat down in the plush seats down below. I was always up above where they stayed stationary, the seats.
Right.
Yeah. So I got the 2 beers. I put the seat down, and unbeknownst to me, the seat went back up again.
That's right, because they're the newer seats that they put closer to the ring.
And I didn't know that. I sat down, I went right to the floor.
Oh,
and everybody's looking at me, because, Boston coach. So I got up and I held the cans up, never lost a drop. And they give me standing
They
ovation.
give you a cheer.
Well, then there was the big time that we were in Colorado, and this was Marvin Hagler's shot. So you figure this would have been like 1979, and
No, I'm 80, I think.
1980.
Yeah, it was 80.
So he was fighting a guy named Vito Anafermo, and Vito Anafermo had like a really kind of weird looking forehead, and he would cut really easy. And so we thought, this is going to
Destroy him.
Just going to destroy him. He's not going. It's going to be nothing. So, Dad, we were in Pittsburgh, right? I was on the road trip. We were going to Pittsburgh, then Boston, and then. So Hagler was fighting that night. So Dad says, "I'm betting everybody $20 that Marvin Hagler from Boston's going to beat Vito Anafermo." Oh, all right. Yeah.
So they didn't want to bet.
They didn't want to bet, but Dad made him.
I made the bet.
And as you're getting off the bus, you said,
I said, I'll tell you how confident I am. If it's a draw, I'll give you the money. Never dreaming it'd be
a draw in a championship fight.
a draw in a championship fight. and it was a draw.
Oh.
And the funny thing was, this is really funny. So we're in the room, and I am really steaming. Like, I'm steaming because I lost the money. I'm steaming because
Hagler lost, and Hagler beat the hell out of him for 15 rounds.
It was like a joke. It was the fix was in. So the phone rang, ding, and I picked it up like the ding, and he didn't know I picked it up. Jack Valakat, I'll never forget. Jack Valakat was the guy phoning. They were going to make fun of me because they were all in a room.
They're all hooting and hollering.
They're all hollering because they know. And so I'm listening, and I hear Jack say, "Gee, he's really going to be mad." And he says, and I'm phoning him right away. And he says, and I'm the guy phoning him. And he says, "Do you think he's going to be mad?" The guy says, "Oh, he's going to be mad." I'm listening on the phone. He says, "Well, I'm not phoning him. If you guys want to talk to him, I'm not talking to him." And he hung up. And so now the next fight, Anafermo got his eyebrows shaved. It cost him 10 because he didn't want him to cut again.
Because he did. Like he was. The joke with Anafermo was he started to bleed during the national anthem.
Yeah.
And so he had plastic surgery, and he had all his brow shaved down so it wouldn't cut, and they got rid of all the scar tissue. And we were actually at the fight. It was at the Boston Gardens, and they got us a box. And was about the second round.
He cut him on purpose. He butted him on purpose. Butted him on purpose, so he'd bleed. And then he just annihilated him.
Yeah, he cut and the one thing Anafermo didn't want to do was get cut. And did he ever coco bop him though?
He did it, and he could have beat him with one hand. So I talked to a guy going out, a little guy, and I said, "Why would he do that?" And he said, "That's the way he is. That's the way Marvis is." And he's a mean guy.
Yeah.
But you know what? And he never lost a fight. He never really did. He never lost that fight to Sugar Ray. I never forgot that fight. He should have won.
Yeah. The one thing, too, I like for a lot of people who maybe a little bit younger we were talking about the Tommy Hearns fight.
Yeah.
And back then, you had to go to a rink to watch the fight. It wasn't like it was on HBO or anything and you could watch at home. And it was dangerous going to those things.
Well, you didn't fool around there. You mind your own business.
Because, if you go to a Leaf game, 90% of the people are rooting for the Leafs. If you go to a Boston Garden or Philly, they're all rooting for the home team. The Boston, we went to see Hagler Hearns at the Maple Leaf Gardens, and it was jammed.
Yeah.
And they had people in the seats, it was packed. And half the guys were rooting for Hagler, and half the guys were rooting for Hearns, and everybody was drinking, and it was.
Remember the time we went to see Barry McGuigan, I think it was,
right,
in the Varsity Arena,
and he fought a guy named Cruz.
Yeah, and so there was a guy there, professor or something, and he had a big blind, and he kept asking people questions, and I said to Tim, "Tim, if anything happens back of us, don't say a word." I said, "Don't even look back," because they said there's going to be trouble back there. And I remember you saying, "Why?" And I said, "Just don't," because this guy was bugging the fighter.
He had a big textbook. And, he was he had the attitude of, here I am looking at the professor looking at the Neanderthals, the troglodytes.
Analyzing them.
Analyzing it and all that. And there was a controversial decision. The guy picked up the book.
One of the fans picked up the book and just fired it up against the wall.
The spine broke and the papers went everywhere. Then it hit a guy and he turned around. Who hit me with the book? And just it all.
And I said, "Don't even look around," because.
Well, even at that Marvin Hagler, again, that Marvin Hagler-Tommy Hearns fight at the Gardens, everybody was smoking, and they kept saying, "Don't smoke because you can't see the screen," right? Because the smoke was, but everybody was smoking, and we saw one guy that we kind of knew. Remember, he got into a fight.
He had too much to say. He was all cut to ribbons.
Guys, and the funny thing was, it was better than most of the prelims. These two guys were fighting, and the one guy that we kind of knew was leaning against the boards after, because they had the boards of the rink boards, but then they had seats in the middle, and blood was just pouring off him. And I thought,
didn't fool around in those days.
I thought, the police didn't want to arrest anybody because I think the police wanted to watch the fight, right?